Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Reverend Steve Andrews. Today's text is from Numbers chapter 31. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Avenge the people of Israel and the Midianites. Afterward you shall be gathered to your people." So Moses spoke to the people, saying, "Arm men from among you for the war. They may go against Midian to execute Yahweh's vengeance on Midian. You shall send 1,000 men from each of the tribes of Israel to the war." So there were provided out of the thousands of Israel 1,000 from each tribe, 12,000 armed for war. And Moses sent them to the war, 1,000 from each tribe, together with Phinehas the son of Eleazar the priest, with the vessels of the sanctuary and the trumpets for the alarm in his hand. They warred against Midian as Yahweh commanded Moses, and killed every male. They killed the kings of Midian with the rest of their slain, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. And they also killed Balaam, the son of Beor, with the sword. And the people of Israel took captive the women of Midian and their little ones, and they took as plunder all their cattle, their flocks, and all their goods, all their cities, and the places where they lived, and all their encampments they burned with fire, and took all the spoil and all the plunder, both of man and of beast. Then they brought the captives and the plunder and the spoil to Moses and to Eleazar the priest, and to the congregation of the people of Israel at the camp on the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. Moses and Eleazar the priest and all the chiefs of the congregation went to meet them outside the camp. And Moses was angry with the officers of the army, the commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds, who had come from service in the war. Moses said to them, "Have you let all the women live? Behold, these on Balaam's advice caused the people of Israel to act treacherously against Yahweh in the incident of Peor, and so the plague came among the congregation of Yahweh. Now therefore kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known man by lying with him. But all the young girls who have not known man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves, and camp outside the camp 7 days. Whoever of you has killed any person, and whoever has touched any slain, purify yourselves and your captives on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. You shall purify every garment, every article of skin, all work of goat's hair, and every article of wood." Then Eleazar, the priest, said to the men in the army who had gone out to battle, "This is the statute of the law that Yahweh has commanded Moses. Only the gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron, the tin, and the lead, everything that can stand the fire, you shall pass through the fire, and it shall be clean. Nevertheless, it shall also be purified with a water for impurity. And whatever cannot stand the fire, you shall pass through water. You must wash your clothes on the 7th day, and you shall be clean. And afterward you may come into the camp." Yahweh said to Moses, "Take the count of the plunder that was taken, both of man and of beast, you and Eleazar the priest and the heads of the fathers' houses of the congregation, and divide the plunder into 2 parts between the warriors who went out to the battle and all the congregation, and levy for Yahweh a tribute from the men of war who went out to battle, 1 out of 500, of the people and of the oxen and of the donkeys and of the flocks. Take it from their half and give it to Eleazar the priest as a contribution to Yahweh. And from the people of Israel's half you shall take 1 drawn out of every 50, of the people, of the oxen, of the donkeys, and of the flocks, of all the cattle, and give them to the Levites who keep guard over the tabernacle of Yahweh." And Moses and Eleazar the priest did as Yahweh commanded Moses. Now the plunder remaining of the spoil that the army took was 675,000 sheep, 72,000 cattle, 61,000 donkeys, and 32,000 persons in all, women who had not known man by lying with him. And the half, the portion of those who had gone out in the army, numbered 337,500 sheep, and Yahweh's tribute of sheep was 675. The cattle were 36,000, of which Yahweh's tribute was 72. The donkeys were 30,500, of which Yahweh's tribute was 61. The persons were 16,000, of which Yahweh's tribute was 32 persons. And Moses gave the tribute, which was the contribution for Yahweh, to Eleazar the priest as Yahweh commanded Moses. From the people of Israel's half, which Moses separated from that of the men who had served in the army, now the congregation's half was 337,500 sheep, 36,000 cattle, and 30,500 donkeys, and 16,000 persons. From the people of Israel's half Moses took 1 of every 50, both of persons and of beasts, and gave them to the Levites who kept guard over the tabernacle of Yahweh, as Yahweh commanded Moses. Then the officers who were over the thousands of the army The commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds came near to Moses and said to Moses, "Your servants have counted the men of war who are under our command, and there is not a man missing from us. And we have brought Yahweh's offering, what each man found, articles of gold, armlets and bracelets, signet rings, earrings, and beads, to make atonement for ourselves before Yahweh." And Moses and Eleazar the priest received from them the gold, all crafted articles, and all the gold of the contribution that they presented to Yahweh from the commanders of thousands and the commanders of hundreds was 16,750 shekels. The men in the army had each taken plunder for himself. And Moses and Eleazar the priest received the gold from the commanders of thousands and of hundreds, and brought it into the tent of meeting as a memorial for the people of Israel before Yahweh. This is the word of the Lord. The hardest thing by far of this text is the idea of killing. Right? As Christians, as those who have learned from Jesus that we should not take life, we see a lot of killing in this text, and violently so. And so that's going to be the tricky part, and it connects to God's judgment. It's got to be understood in that context for it to make any sense. But let's double back to the first part. So at the beginning, God gives this instruction. Right? This is commanded by Yahweh himself. Avenge the people of Israel on the Midianites. Avenge. What are they avenging? So this isn't just an attack action. This is fighting back against something that was done to them. This is what we saw back in chapter 25, verse 16. This is where we first heard that this was going to happen. So about a week ago or so. Twofold is the referent. Balak, king of Moab, partnered with the Midianites to hire Balaam, a diviner, to come in and curse God's people so that he could destroy them. So the Midianites are in on that plot to destroy Israel. And secondly, they then, apparently at Balaam's advice, which shows up later in this text, they seek to undermine the faith of the Israelites by sending their daughters to marry into Israel and bring with them their false gods, their false worship. And it worked. Back in chapter 25 again, this was a big problem. This is why God later forbids intermarriage. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So, yeah, chronologically in the Bible, at least, it's later. It's in Deuteronomy is where we see the command from the Lord that they aren't to marry from any of the tribes outside of Israel. They do it anyway, which continues to get them into trouble in the future. That's going to already give you a color. When you have that perspective, it already colors our understanding of this text. That this is going to be the idea of God's judgment, his wrath against this people who were seeking to destroy his holy people. He has set Israel apart, and they sought to kill them. They sought to even kill them, not just physical death, but to strip them away from Yahweh, which would lead to death forever. And so God is enacting his revenge against them for this. Verse 2 does note, after this battle is over, Moses will die. Afterward, you shall be gathered to your people. So they're going to execute Yahweh's vengeance. Verse 4, 1,000 from each tribe. So a quick little math question for your kids, depending on how old they are. How many soldiers does that mean are going to go out and fight? 12 tribes, 1,000 each, 12,000 men. The number itself is actually given to us there in verse 5. And they go out with Phinehas the priest. There's a question you could ask your kids. Do priests go into battle today? If our country were to send soldiers off to war, they send priests with them. And in some ways they do. Chaplains is what we call them. But it's a different picture than it is here. The chaplain is there primarily for the sake of the soldier in our country's structure of things. Although you can certainly understand that in other countries and in the history of the world, they would have sent spiritual leaders in hopes of having the favor of the divine, whoever it is that they worship falsely or truly in the case of some Christian communities. But here, this is the priest going into war with the soldiers, and he's carrying some of the vessels of the sanctuary, some of the very holy things of God from the tabernacle. And he also has the trumpet from chapter 10 that sounds the alarm. And the purpose of that trumpet, according to chapter 10, verse 9, was so that Yahweh would remember his people and he would save them from their enemies. And that's what's going to happen in this text. You're going to pick up on that at the very end of the chapter. A really neat note, profound note that's going to be coming up. So as that paragraph continues, we see they kill every male. They kill the 5 kings. They even kill Balaam, that diviner who was supposed to curse Israel but instead blessed them. He's still a sinner. He's done terrible things. He's practiced sorcery and in the sense of divination. And that's forbidden. I mean, that's all kinds of pagan practices in that. So he has rejected Yahweh at many times. Whether or not he is still in that state of rejection when he's killed here, I don't know. We see some decent interaction with Balaam, with Yahweh in the chapters before this, but it's hard to say his end result. We can't say his end result. Instead of killing the women and the children, they took them captive. They plundered everything. They burned their cities. When they return, Moses is angry. Here's where you can ask why to your children. See if they can pick up on why Moses is angry. Might be interesting to hear from our kids. The reason he's angry is they let people live. This was to be God's battle. This was to be God's judgment against the Midianites for trying to destroy his people. God was going to destroy them, and they spared them. The people did not carry out the command that God instructed them to do. So, I mean, this is God's judgment. That's the tricky part of this text that we have to understand. Were the women any less guilty of trying to destroy Israel than the men were? There was no war. Midian never declared war and sent soldiers running after Israel. They hired a diviner, a spiritual person, to try to curse them, and then they used their women to intermarry with them and to dissuade them from following Yahweh and to chase after their gods instead. So the women are no less guilty. They're no less responsible for the trouble here than the men were. This is God's divine judgment, and he can issue his judgment at any time, anywhere, however he pleases. I deserve this. That's something that we have to understand about the text. I deserve to be there. I deserve to be killed. That's my sin. I have sinned gravely against the Lord. Even one would be grave, which, the connection there to death. I deserve death for my actions. It's only by God's mercy that he spares. Now we're thankful, right? In the New Testament, we know of Jesus. We know of his mercy that he has given to us, that he has given us forgiveness. He has spared us from the death that we rightly deserve and has promised to instead give us life if we follow him, if we trust him. These Midianites do not. They're following other gods, and they're using those pagan practices to try and kill those who do follow God. So God enacts his judgment on them. And there is a bit of mercy, as even after all of this, Moses instructs them to let basically the female children, let the girls live. So it's a tough text in that regard. But that part of judgment that I deserve this, and it's by Jesus' mercy, it's by Jesus' grace that I don't receive this, is something to focus on. Soldiers are to camp outside the camp for 7 days because they're unclean, and they have to go through that ritual of cleanliness, which includes the washing on the 3rd and 7th day, the water of purification, both on them and all their stuff. We're going to see that go up again in the next paragraph. So if you can pass something through fire and it survives, do that. That'll clean it, and then you still have to use the water of impurity. Otherwise, wash it in the water. Assumedly, still using the water for impurity with that as well. So they divide the plunder, everything that they took, into 2 parts, split between the warriors and the congregation. 1 out of 500, so 0.2%. of the stuff for the soldiers is given as a tribute to Yahweh, which goes to Eleazar the priest, and it would seem from that then also to his family who serves with him, his sons who are priests with him, and then the amount given to the congregation, 2%, so 10 times as much as the soldiers. 2% of that is given this time to the Levites for their service to the Lord's house. Either case, it's a lot less than the tithe, but it's still enough for them to be reminded where this wealth comes from, where this provision that they've just received came from. It comes not from their own hand, it comes from the hand of Yahweh. Lots of numbers there. You can play with them if you want, talk about them with your kids. Moving on beyond that, though, the notes to pick up in the last paragraph, one of the key notes, there is not a man missing from us. That's the soldiers' account. 12,000 went out to fight, 12,000 came home. They killed every Midianite male and their kings. That shows you that God's hand is involved in this, that it was Yahweh that fought for them. Otherwise, that wouldn't have happened. Even the best trained army still suffers casualties in the fight. But not if they're not the ones doing the fighting. Not if it's Yahweh that fights for them. This isn't the only instance in the Old Testament where this happens. It certainly happens more than once. This is God's fighting. It's God's judgment. Another note on God's judgment that you could connect with is to think of Sodom and Gomorrah, those terrible cities back in Genesis chapter 18 that sought to kill and rape Lot and the angels that had visited there. And God rains down fire and brimstone on those two cities and destroys them completely and everyone who is in them. We don't typically have sympathy for them. We tend to think that they deserved it. And so you see a contrast there for Sodom and Gomorrah than maybe how a lot of people would respond reading about the Midianites. And while I'm convincing you here to see this as God's judgment, on the flip side of that, I would still convince you that we should grieve. Both Sodom, Gomorrah, and the Midianites. We should grieve this. This is not the outcome that God desires. This is not what we would desire. We don't want harm to come to our neighbor, no matter who they are, no matter what they've done, no matter how evil in the eyes of the Lord or how evil in even the eyes of the world they might be. This is Ezekiel, comes up in his writings a couple of times, that God does not desire the death of the wicked, but that the wicked would turn from his evil ways and live. And again, that's why he sent Jesus. It's why Jesus sends the Holy Spirit to convict us of our sin and to bring us to repentance. So we grieve. Grieve this, rightly so. Grieve this text. Pray that the Lord would let this text inspire you, encourage you to pray to the Lord for your enemies today, the people in this world who are evil, that might hate you, that might have harmed you. Pray for them, that the Lord would bring them to repentance and faith. The soldiers bring in their offering to make atonement for themselves, so they're reconciled with God for their sin. And we see the number there in verse 52, 16,750 shekels equals 6,700 ounces, which in today's dollars is about $12 million worth of gold. So it's quite a haul of plunder that we see there in the text. And it's a memorial for the people of Israel before Yahweh. So it stands as a reminder to the people of who fought for them, who has done this thing. It wasn't them, it was God.